They laughed at Earth's fleet until they realized humans built it. The Vreth delegation laughed first. I will give them that. They had the nerve to be openly rude before everyone else in that hall found the courage to join them. Chev Sorrel, their lead ambassador, did not even try to hide it. She leaned toward her attaché, said something low and sharp in Vreth, and the translator bead clipped to my collar caught every word. Did they run out of material halfway through? I kept my face still. 14 years commanding a fleet will teach you that, if nothing else teaches you anything at all. The Interstellar Conclave's review corridor stretched nearly 2 kilometers above the orbital platform at Vila Station. Every sovereign civilization in the Conclave had sent their finest ships for the formal fleet display. The Keth had sent their cathedral-class vessels, all white curves and light, like someone had folded a star into the shape of a warship. The Sauran brought their needle-thin skimmers, each one moving with the kind of precision that made your eyes hurt trying to track them. The Drevari formation was a geometric masterpiece, 11 ships moving as one body, like a single thought made of metal. Then our ships came through. 14 vessels, Earth Space Alliance vessels, every one of them. The flagship, the Bakersfield, led the column. Behind her came the Roanoke, the Dunkirk, the Leningrad, the Covington, the Arnhem, names that meant nothing to anyone in that hall except us. I watched the alien delegations watch our fleet, and I felt the exact moment the mood shifted. Our ships were not beautiful. I knew that. I had always known that. The Bakersfield was broad and low-slung, her hull covered in protrusions that jutted at angles which made no aesthetic sense. Panels that overlapped other panels, redundant emitter arrays stacked in clusters along the dorsal spine. Her engine configuration was not symmetrical. 3 primary drives mounted on an offset frame, 7 secondary drives distributed around the hull in positions that looked, from the outside, like an afterthought, or a mistake. She looked like something built by people who were afraid. The laughter spread from the Vreth section, not loud, not cruel, worse than both, polite. The kind of laughter that carries pity inside it like a stone inside a piece of fruit. The Keth ambassador whispered to his aide. The Sauran representative tilted her head in that way their species does when something confuses them. The Drevari simply stared, and their stillness was its own kind of verdict. My aide, Lieutenant Calvin Marsh, stood 2 steps behind me. He was 26 years old, sharp as broken glass, and this was his first conclave event. I heard his breath change when the laughter started, a small tightening, the sound of someone swallowing something they did not like the taste of. I did not say anything to him. I was watching Chev Sorrel. She was studying the Bakersfield with the focused attention of someone who had already made up her mind, but wanted the details for her report. Her eyes moved along the hull protrusions, paused at the secondary arrays, continued down to the offset engine configuration. She made a small note on the tablet in her hand. Then she looked up and found me looking at her. She offered a diplomatic smile, the kind that says, "We both know what this is, and we are both too professional to say it out loud." I smiled back. She took it for embarrassment. That was the first mistake she made. Marsh leaned forward slightly. "Sir," he said, just above a whisper, "the Keth formation is getting applause." "I can hear it." "Our ships are not." "I can hear that too." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, doesn't it bother you?" The honest answer was no. The honest answer was that I had spent 31 years inside these ships, learning every joint and seal and redundant circuit of them, and what other people thought when they looked at them from the outside had never once been the point. The point was what happened when everything went wrong at once. The point was the morning after the kind of night no one planned for. The point was 30 wars. I did not say any of that to Marsh. He would understand it eventually, or he would transfer to a desk position somewhere comfortable, and either outcome was fine. What I said was, take notes on which delegations are laughing and which ones aren't. He straightened. "Yes, sir." The Bakersfield completed her pass through the corridor and took her position at the head of the Earth formation. From where I stood on the observation gallery, she looked exactly like what she was. A vessel built by a species that had run out of luck too many times to trust luck. Every protrusion on that hull had a reason behind it that could be written in names. Names of people, names of places, names of days we did not want to repeat. The conclave's master of ceremonies, a Sauran official named Velanes, concluded the review with formal language about unity and shared purpose. The applause for the Earth formation was polite, short, calibrated to the minimum acceptable duration. Chev Sorrel caught my eye again across the gallery as the delegations began to disperse toward the reception level. She raised her tablet slightly, a gesture that meant, "I would like to speak further." I nodded. Marsh appeared at my shoulder as we moved toward the corridor. "She's going to ask for a formal tour," he said. "Yes. Are you going to give her one?" I thought about the Bakersfield, about the blast door on level 7, about the secondary arrays she had dismissed in her notes as redundant, about the bridge location that was not where any conclave schematic would place it, because we had moved it 32 years ago after a battle that took 41 people in under 6 seconds, and the admiral who survived it had personally redrawn the spec herself, by hand, at a field hospital on Kepler, while her hands were still shaking. "Yes," I said, "I'm going to give her a very thorough tour." Marsh looked uncertain. "Sir, some of those systems are classified." "Some of them are." "So what do we show her?" "Everything that looks like a weakness," I said. "Everything she's already decided is a flaw." He did not say anything for a moment. We walked down the corridor toward the reception level, the sounds of 14 civilizations talking over each other filling the air in a dozen languages the translator bead, rendered as a low, constant murmur. "I don't understand," Marsh said finally. "I know," I said. "Write that down too." The reception level was all clean lines and soft light. Servers moved through the crowd carrying things that smelled interesting and tasted like nothing. I accepted a glass of something blue, held it without drinking it, and watched the room. The Keth clustered together near the far wall, talking with the Drevari in a way that looked collegial but had an edge to it I had learned to read over the years. The Sauran moved in pairs, always in pairs, gathering impressions. The smaller delegations, the ones without cathedral-class fleets or needle-thin skimmers, stayed near the center of the room and tried not to look like they were staying near the center of the room. No one approached the Earth delegation for 11 minutes. Marsh counted. I knew because I saw his lips moving. When Chev Sorrel finally crossed the room toward us, she did it with the confidence of someone who considered it a kindness. Her species was tall, all bone-white skin and eyes that shifted color with their mood. Right now they were a pale gold, curious, comfortable. "Admiral Gary Lennox," she said, because she had done her preparation and knew my name. "Your fleet made quite an impression." "They tend to," I said. She paused for just a fraction of a second. Then the diplomatic smile again. "I was hoping you might be willing to show me more of your flagship, the Bakersfield. Yes, I find Earth engineering philosophy very," she searched for the word, "interesting." I looked at her pale gold eyes. I thought laughing people don't study. Studying people think they already understand what they're looking at. I thought good. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "I'll give you the full tour myself." Behind me, Marsh made a small sound that was not quite a word. I did not look at him. Chev Sorrel smiled, satisfied, and moved back toward her delegation. I watched her go. Somewhere behind the tall windows of the observation gallery, the Bakersfield sat in the docking column with all her protrusions and offset drives and redundant everything, looking exactly like what 14 civilizations had decided she was. A mistake. A remnant of something primitive. A fleet built by a species that had not yet learned how ships were supposed to look. My aide's update chimed softly at my wrist. Routine. Casualty figures from the Kepler patrol. 11 injured, none critical. Supply lines holding. I read it, set the screen face down. The blue drink in my hand was warm now. I put it on a passing tray and watched the conclave's finest minds fill the room with the sound of civilizations that had never once, in their long and elegant histories, run out of options on the worst possible day. I almost felt sorry for what was coming. Almost. The Bakersfield smelled like recycled air and machine oil, and something faintly metallic that never fully left the lower decks no matter how many times the filters ran their cycles. I had served on 3 different Earth vessels over my career, and they all smelled the same. I had stopped noticing it years ago. Chef Sorrel noticed it immediately. She paused at the main airlock threshold, her nostrils flaring slightly, and I watched her file it away with the same quiet efficiency she had filed away the hull protrusions the day before. Everything went into her mental catalog. Every detail was data. I respected that about her. I did not underestimate it. "Welcome aboard," I said. She stepped inside with 2 attachés at her back, both carrying recording equipment that she had been polite enough to ask permission to bring. I had said yes. I wanted them to record. Lieutenant Marsh fell in behind us with his tablet and the expression of a man who was holding 17 questions in his mouth simultaneously, and had been told, very clearly, to swallow all of them. We started on the main operations deck. "The command configuration is unusual," Chef Sorrel said, looking at the layout. 14 stations arranged in 2 concentric rings, each one independent of the others, each one with its own power feed and its own backup power feed. On Vreth vessels, command operations are centralized, more efficient. "Yes," I said. "This seems like a great deal of extra space for redundant function." "It does seem that way." She looked at me. The pale gold had a faint green edge to it now. That meant she was measuring me, trying to decide if I was being dismissive or if I genuinely agreed with her assessment. "Is there a reason for the distributed layout?" she asked. I thought about Lieutenant Commander Diane Park, who had commanded the Roanoke's operations deck during the Vega engagement, and had kept the ship functional for 19 minutes after the Central Command Corps took a direct hit, because her station was on an independent feed 12 meters away from the explosion, and she had known her board without looking at it since year 3 of her commission. She had kept them alive. She had not gotten a commendation for it, because she had not survived the 19th minute. "We found centralization had some drawbacks in certain operational conditions," I said. Chef Sorrel made a note. We moved down to the primary engine compartment. The 3 main drives occupied the aft third of the ship, enormous and loud even at idle, vibrating through the floor in a way that put pressure behind your back teeth. I had always found it comforting, the sound of something with too much power for the space it was in. 3 primary drives, Chef Sorrel said, walking the perimeter of the chamber. One of her attachés was getting everything on camera, but the output configuration is asymmetrical. Port drive is offset by 11 degrees. She looked up at me. "Is that intentional?" "Yes." "Why?" I thought about the 3 seconds of margin it gave a Bakersfield-class vessel during a lateral breach scenario. 3 seconds did not sound like much. It was everything. "Redundancy," I said. She made another note. I could see her building her internal picture of the ship, filing it under, over-engineered, inefficient, the product of a species that had not yet learned the elegance of precision. She was not wrong about the engineering. She was wrong about what it meant. We passed through the mechanical level, the water reclamation, the secondary power grid that she described as impressively large for a vessel of this class. I agreed with everything she said. I corrected nothing. I let her catalog fill up with what she thought she was seeing. Then we reached the 7th level corridor. It was not on the official tour. I had included it anyway. The corridor was like any other on the Bakersfield, except for the blast door on the port wall. It was 3 times the standard thickness. The metal was a different color than the surrounding hull because it had been sourced from a different batch, from a different facility, welded in place by a different hand than the rest of the ship. The seam where it met the original hull was visible if you looked closely. Not a flaw, a record. Chef-Zoral's attaché swept the camera across it and moved on. Chef-Zoral herself stopped. "This door," she said. Her eyes were purely green now, something that was not quite suspicion but lived next door to it. "The material is different." "Yes. It was added later, after the original construction." "Yes. Why?" I looked at the door for a moment, at the seam where the old metal met the new, at the small, almost invisible mark pressed into the lower corner of the frame. Initials. Put there by the person who welded it. A habit she had. Everyone who served under her knew about it. No one had ever painted over it because no one had ever wanted to. T.S. Corporal Teela Singh. She had been 23 years old. She had been a welder and a maintenance tech, and in the 6 minutes that defined the rest of everyone else's lives, she had been the reason 47 people on the other side of that door were still alive to go home to their families. The breach had hit on the port side, mid-engagement, during the Kepler operation. The original door had failed. The bulkhead integrity behind it was gone. The section was venting. Teela Singh had been on the wrong side of it with a welding kit, and a head full of specifications she had memorized, because she was the kind of person who memorized specifications for the same reason other people carried a spare. She had sealed it herself. From the inside. "We had a situation," I said. "A crew member responded to it. We made changes to the design afterward." Chef-Zoral studied the door. Her expression was careful now, the diplomatic surface thinning slightly. "What kind of situation?" I looked at her. "The kind we design against." She waited for more. I did not give it to her. She made a note on her tablet. Then she looked back at the door one more time, and something in her face shifted very slightly. Not understanding. Not yet. Something smaller. The beginning of a question she did not know how to form. We moved on. The secondary weapons array took up an entire subdeck that Chef-Zoral had initially classified in her notes as cargo space. When I opened the door and she walked inside and understood what she was looking at, she stopped moving entirely for 4 full seconds. "This is another weapons system," she said. "Yes." "In addition to the primary array." "Yes." "This would be," she was calculating, "roughly 40% of the Bakersfield's total volume devoted to weapons systems. 43 currently. We reconfigured in the last refit." She turned to look at me. The green was gone. Her eyes had gone to a color I had not seen before on a Vreth, a deep, quiet blue. "Your primary array is already one of the largest we have on record for a vessel this size. Why would you need this as well?" The answer was not complicated. The primary array was for winning. The secondary array was for the moment after losing, when there was still work left to do and the ship had to keep doing it. When the primary was gone or compromised or offline, and you were still in the engagement, and there were still people depending on you to have another answer, another option, something that kept firing when everything the enemy expected you to have had already been taken away. I said, the primary array is for winning. The secondary array is for the moment after we've lost. The silence in that room lasted a long time. Her attachés had both stopped recording. Or maybe they had kept recording and just gone very still. I could not tell the difference. Chef-Zoral looked at me. "You plan for losing." "We plan for surviving it," I said. "It's different." She looked around the subdeck. At the rows of secondary emitters, each one with its own independent targeting system, its own power feed, its own cooling circuit. At the redundancies. At the ship within the ship, the fallback position, the second answer. She wrote something on her tablet. She did not show me what. We finished the tour on the observation deck, looking out at Vila Station and the other ships still docked in the review columns. The Keth Cathedral vessels, the Sauron Needles, all of them elegant. All of them designed around the idea that a battle would go the way a battle was supposed to go. "Your ship is very different from what I expected," Chef Zoral said. She was looking out at the Keth formation. Her voice had lost its diplomatic evenness just slightly. "Not much. Enough." "What did you expect?" She considered the question honestly, which I had not anticipated. "Something more primitive," she said. "Your fleet looked from the outside like the product of a civilization that was still working out the basics. But this ship is not primitive. It is," she paused, "it is built around a theory I don't recognize." "What theory is that?" She turned to look at me. "That everything will go wrong." I looked out at the Bakersfield's hull through the observation window. At the protrusions, the offset drives, the two thick walls, the door on level 7 with the initials pressed into the corner of the frame. "Not everything," I said, "just enough." She thought about that for a long time. On the way back to the airlock, she stopped once more, this time in the main corridor on level 3, where the wall panels were plain and unremarkable. She put her hand flat against the surface. "This wall," she said, "is it also reinforced?" "Yes." "Also a retrofit?" "Yes." She left her hand there for a moment. Then she took it away. She did not ask what happened. I think some part of her, the part that had gone quiet in the secondary weapons subdeck and not fully recovered, had already decided she did not want the answer to that particular question today. She thanked me at the airlock with correct formal phrasing, and took her attachés and her very full catalog back to the Vreth diplomatic suite. Marsh walked beside me as I headed back toward the bridge. "She's going to file a report," he said. "She's already filing it in her head." "What do you think she'll conclude?" I thought about the pale gold color of her eyes when she arrived, the deep blue when she stood in the secondary weapons subdeck, the way she had looked at the blast door on level 7, the way she had put her hand on the wall of level 3 and then taken it away without asking the question. "She'll conclude that we're more capable than she thought," I said. "She'll still think we're strange. She'll still think the design philosophy is excessive." I paused. "She'll be right about both. But she won't understand it." "No." We reached the bridge. I took my seat. The Bakersfield hummed around me the way she always did, the smell of recycled air and machine oil, the vibration of the offset drives through the deck plates. "Sir," Marsh said, standing at his station, "can I ask you something?" "You can try." "Why does it matter if they understand? If we know the ship's work, why does it matter what the conclave thinks of them?" I looked at him. He was 26, sharp as broken glass, and he genuinely wanted to know. "It doesn't matter," I said, "what they think of the ships." He waited. "What matters is what they think of us. And right now, they think we're the civilization that showed up to the fleet review with the ugly ships and the wrong engines and the walls that are too thick." I turned back to the main screen. "That's a very comfortable thing for them to think." He was quiet. "Keep thinking it," I said, and I was not talking to Marsh anymore. Outside, through the bridge viewport, Vila Station moved through its slow orbit. The Keth vessels were beautiful in the docking columns. The Sauron Needles caught the starlight and scattered it. The Bakersfield sat among them like a thing that had been built by people who knew something they had not been asked to share yet. She would wait. She was very good at waiting. The message came at 3:47 station time, which is the hour when bad news always arrives, because bad news has no consideration for anyone's schedule. I was on the bridge. I did not sleep well in station gravity. There was something about the steadiness of it that my body had never fully accepted, 30 years of fleet duty having convinced my nervous system that floors were supposed to hum. Marsh was not on the bridge. Ensign Laura Voss was, running the overnight watch with 3 crew members who had the focused, hollow look of people doing their jobs very well in the hope that nothing interesting happened. Something interesting happened. The communications panel lit up on the priority band, not the standard diplomatic frequency, the emergency relay. The one that sat quiet for months at a time and then never carried good news. Voss turned to me before she had even finished reading it. Her face told me everything before her voice did. "Admiral Lennox," she said, "the Crescent Compact has engaged at Harvan IV." I was already out of the chair. "Vreth Colony," she continued, pulling the data onto the main screen. "Population roughly 40,000. Crescent fleet came out of transit 12 minutes ago. Compact formation, 6 vessels. They hit the orbital defense grid first." The data was streaming in clean and fast. The Vreth orbital defense at Harvan IV was not nothing. 2 medium-class platforms and a missile net. The Crescent Compact had gone through it in under 4 minutes, which told me something very specific about what kind of ships they were flying and how well they had prepared for this particular morning. "Harvan IV is conclave space," I said. "Yes, sir." "What's the conclave response?" Voss looked at her screen. She was very young for the overnight watch and doing a very competent job of not letting her face show what her face was showing. "Nothing yet, sir. The emergency relay is still open. Conclave security channel is..." She paused. "It's active. Multiple parties on the line." "Put it on." The channel opened. 14 voices in 8 languages rendered through the translation system as a smooth, calm murmur that was worse than the chaos underneath it, because calm murmurs made it too easy to pretend everything was still orderly. The Keth representative was citing the charter. The Drivari wanted a formal threat assessment before committing assets. The Saurin were asking about proximity of their nearest vessels and the current state of their repair schedules. Harvan IV was losing its orbital defense grid. "Proximity of Earth fleet to Harvan IV," I said. 14 light minutes transit at full drive, Voss said. 1340 at push. 13 minutes and 40 seconds. For 14 civilizations currently composing their diplomatic objections on the emergency channel, Harvan IV was going to look very far away for a very long time. I looked at the main screen, at the orbital data still streaming in, at the crescent formation, 6 vessels working through the defense grid with the clean efficiency of people who had done a great deal of preparation and had a very clear picture of what they expected to find when they got there. They had not expected to find us in the adjacent transit corridor. They had no way of knowing that our scheduled departure from Vila Station had been delayed 48 hours for a routine supply transfer, which had put us 11 light minutes closer to Harvan IV than any prior route calculation would have suggested. Luck. I do not trust luck. I have seen too much of what happens when luck runs out, but I am willing to use it while it lasts. "Get me Commander Ellen Hale on the Roanoke," I said, "and Captain George Dutton on the Dunkirk. Fleet channel all 14 vessels, now." "Sir," Voss was already moving. I looked at the conclave emergency channel. The Drivari were still asking about the threat assessment. The Keth had moved on to debating whether the Crescent Compact's action was a territorial incursion or a political demonstration, as if that distinction was relevant to the 40,000 people on the ground at Harvan IV. I picked up the fleet channel. "This is Admiral Lennox. All vessels to combat configuration. Navigation, plot transit to Harvan IV at push. Engines to full. We leave in 6 minutes." On the conclave channel, someone said something in Saurin that the translator rendered as, "Earth is moving." I closed the channel. Marsh arrived on the bridge at a run, hair still pressed flat on one side, uniform not fully secured. He looked at the main screen, then at me. "Harvan IV," he said. "Yes. We're going." I looked at him. Someone has to. He held my eyes for a moment. Then he went to his station and started pulling up systems without another word. I noted that he did not ask why it should be us, or whether we had authority to act outside a formal conclave mandate, or any of the other questions a diplomat would have asked. He just started working the problem in front of him. He was going to be fine. The Bakersfield went to combat configuration the way she always did. Not fast, not the graceful snap of a ship that had been designed for elegance. She did it the way a large, purposeful thing extends itself when it decides to stop waiting, panels extending from the dorsal spine, secondary arrays rotating to operational position, the offset engine system shifting its thrust ratio to push configuration, which always made the deck vibrate differently. Not the idle hum, but something lower and more serious, a sound that got into your chest and stayed there. I had heard it 100 times. It still did something to the back of my spine. Fleet Channel, Voss said. Roanoke and Dunkirk confirm. Arnhem, Covington, all confirmed. All 14 vessels in transit configuration. Good. Conclave Security Channel is asking if we filed a departure authorization. Log it. They're asking for a formal response. Tell them we'll file on the return leg. I looked at the transit plot on the main screen. 13 minutes and 38 seconds. Begin transit. The station fell away behind us. The stars stretched. The Bakersfield and 13 Earth vessels went into the dark at push, moving toward a system that did not know we were coming and would not know until we were already there. 13 minutes and 38 seconds is not a long time if you are waiting for something good. It is a very long time if you are waiting for something you cannot stop. I used 10 of those minutes reading the Crescent Compact's tactical file. They were not a civilization I had studied in depth before this moment, and I have never gone into an engagement without knowing the other side's patterns as well as I could manage on the information available. It is not a guarantee. Nothing is a guarantee, but it is the difference between informed risk and careless hope, and I have no patience for careless hope. What I found was a fleet doctrine built around decisive early engagement. The Crescent Compact fought on the assumption that superior initial force would compress any engagement into a short window, removing the need for sustained operational capacity. Their ships were fast, precisely designed, beautifully coordinated. In every recorded engagement in their history, they had ended fights quickly. They had never fought a prolonged engagement. They had never needed to. Marsh appeared at my shoulder. Sir, Conclave Channel is active again. Multiple delegations are filing formal positions on the Harvan IV action. What kind of positions? The Keth are condemning the attack. The Drevari are calling for a negotiated response. The Saurin have moved their nearest vessels to a holding position 3 systems out. He paused. No one else is moving. I looked at the transit clock, 4 minutes out. The Vreth, I said. Marsh's voice was even and professional. Chev Sorrel has formally requested emergency conclave assistance for the Harvan IV colony. He paused again, and this one was longer. She filed the request 11 minutes ago. 11 minutes. She had filed it before anyone had moved, before any fleet had powered its drives, before the Keth condemnation or the Drevari position or the Saurin holding maneuver. She had filed it and then she had waited. And for 11 minutes, 14 civilizations had talked. I thought about the color her eyes had gone in the secondary weapons subdeck, that deep, quiet blue. 2 minutes, Voss said from navigation. Weapons hot, I said. Secondary arrays to standby, all stations confirm. The confirmations came in fast down the fleet channel. 14 crews going to the alert that means something is real and close. Not a drill, not a review. The kind of ready that sits different in your body than any other kind. 1 minute. Admiral Marsh again. He had something in his voice I had not heard from him before. Not fear, something adjacent to it but pointed outward. Whatever's there, we can handle it. I thought about the Crescent Compact's tactical history. Their absolute commitment to the short, decisive fight. Their beautiful, fast, coordinated ships with their centralized command systems and their elegant designs and their complete absence of any redundant anything, because they had never needed redundancy, because they had never been in an engagement that lasted long enough to require it. I thought about the Bakersfield, the secondary arrays, the offset drives, the blast door on level 7, the bridge that was not where anyone would expect a bridge to be. 30 wars. Transition, I said. The stars came back. Harvan IV sat ahead of us, green-brown and cloud-wrapped, looking exactly the way planets look when they do not know what is happening above them. The orbital defense grid was gone. The platforms were debris fields. The Crescent fleet was in close orbit, 6 vessels in a formation I recognized as post-engagement consolidation. They had finished the defense grid and were taking a breath before the next phase. That breath lasted approximately 1.4 seconds after our arrival, which was the time it took their sensors to register 14 Earth vessels coming out of transit at combat configuration, with weapons hot and secondary arrays deployed. The Crescent formation shifted. Fast, they were good. They saw us. Their lead vessel broadcast on the open military frequency. The translation came through clean, no lag. Earth Fleet, you are entering a declared Crescent Compact operational zone. Stand down and withdraw. This is your one notification. I looked at the Bakersfield's weapons display, then at the tactical map, then at Harvan IV, green-brown and cloud-wrapped, with 40,000 Vreth civilians on the surface who had filed no formal request to be here this morning. I opened the fleet channel. All vessels hold position. No one fires first. I switched to the open military frequency. Crescent Compact lead vessel, this is Admiral Gary Lennox, Earth Space Alliance. Harvan IV is a conclave protectorate. Your fleet is in violation of the conclave charter and is directed to withdraw. This is your one notification. 4 seconds of silence. Then, Earth has no jurisdiction here. I'm not discussing jurisdiction, I said. I'm telling you what's about to happen next. Another silence, longer this time. Their formation was reconfiguring. I watched it on the tactical display. They were good at this part too. Clean, fast, coordinated. They were sliding into an engagement posture that put their heaviest vessel on our port side and their fastest 2 ships on a flanking arc. Textbook. Exactly what their doctrine called for. Decisive early pressure, primary force concentrated, fight compressed into a short window. I let them get all the way into position. Sir Voss said, their lead vessel is targeting. I know. Should we? Hold. The Crescent formation completed its configuration. 6 beautiful ships, fast and precisely designed, every angle deliberate and elegant. They had done this before. They knew exactly what they were doing. They looked at the Bakersfield and they saw an asymmetrical, overbuilt, wrong-looking vessel with too many protrusions and an offset engine configuration and panels that stuck out at angles that made no aesthetic sense. They had no way of knowing what any of it was for. Marsh, I said. Sir, tell me what you see. He was quiet for a half-second, looking at the tactical display, at the Crescent formation, at their targeting solutions and their flanking arc and their entire doctrine of decisive early engagement. They're going to hit us first and hit us hard, he said. They think if they do enough damage fast enough, we'll pull back. Yes. But he stopped. Say it. But they don't know about the redundance. I looked at the Bakersfield secondary array display. Green across the board. Every station confirmed. 14 Earth vessels sitting in the dark with their protrusions and their offset drives and their 2 thick walls and their second answers and their third answers and their answers to the answers. No, I said, they don't. The first Crescent volley came in clean, targeted, professionally executed. 3 shots at the primary shield array from their heaviest vessel, coordinated with a lateral strike from the flanking pair. It was excellent shooting. The primary array absorbed all three. The secondary array had not been touched. Silence on the conclave observation frequency for 4 seconds. Then 6. Show them the redundance, I said. 31 minutes. That was the length of the engagement at Harvin IV. I have been asked about it many times since. I have given the official report, which is accurate and complete and reads like what it was. A lopsided engagement between a fleet built for one kind of fight and a fleet built for every kind at once. What the official report does not capture is the sound of a Crescent compact tactical commander, broadcasting on the open military frequency after the 4th minute of contact, when his flanking maneuver had been countered, when his primary concentration had been deflected, when his doctrine of decisive early engagement had compressed into a longer fight than his ships were designed to sustain. He said, "What are these things?" Not what ships are these, not what class, not what weapon system, not what tactical configuration. What are these things? I heard it on the bridge of the Bakersfield while Voss was tracking a secondary strike from the Roanoke, and Marsh was calling out power readings on the port secondary array. I heard it and I thought, there it is. That is the exact moment when a civilization that has never lost a short fight realizes it is in a long one. Our ships did not look different in combat than they looked in port. That was the thing. The Keth vessels, the Saurin Needles, the Drevari formation, all of them transformed in battle. Panels retracted, lines sharpened. The elegance of their design became the elegance of their function. They were built to be beautiful and capable simultaneously, and in combat they were both. The Bakersfield did not become more elegant. She became more intentional. Every protrusion that looked like a mistake was doing something. The redundant emitter clusters on the dorsal spine were cycling through their rotation, distributing load so that no single array overheated and dropped offline. The offset engine configuration was giving us microbursts of lateral correction that our movements should not have been capable of, making our position predictions wrong by exactly enough to matter. The secondary array that had looked like wasted space in a subdeck was returning fire on vectors the Crescent targeting solution had not accounted for because their intelligence on our weapons configuration was based on our primary array, which is what you see when you look at an Earthship from the outside. They had planned for what they could see. They had not planned for the rest. Captain George Dutton on the Dunkirk took the heaviest fire in the 3rd minute. The Crescent lead vessel redirected everything it had onto the Dunkirk, which was the smallest vessel in our formation, and should, by any reasonable tactical calculation, have been the easiest to remove from the engagement. The Dunkirk took 6 direct hits in 40 seconds. She was still there after all 6. Dutton filed his damage report through the fleet channel in the flat, factual tone of a man reading a maintenance checklist. Emitter Cluster 3 was offline, port secondary array at 60%, hull integrity holding at 94, propulsion nominal. Nominal, Marsh said beside me. She took 6 hits and her propulsion is nominal. That's what they're rated for, I said. In actual combat. Why would we rate them for anything else? He did not have an answer for that. The Crescent commander made his second error in the 8th minute. He pulled his flanking ships back into a consolidated formation, which is what his doctrine required when an early engagement did not conclude on schedule. Consolidate, reassess, prepare for a second decisive strike. The problem with that maneuver was that consolidating from a flanking arc required his ships to cross a zone of open space for approximately 11 seconds. 11 seconds. I thought about Diane Park on the Roanoke's operations deck, running her board without power for 19 minutes because her station had an independent feed, and she had known it cold since year 3. I thought about 11 seconds. Roanoke, I said on the fleet channel, you have a window, use it. Commander Ellen Hale did not need clarification. The Roanoke secondary array fired on a coordinated spread that I would later describe in the official report as highly effective, because official reports are not the place for what I actually thought, which was that it was the most precisely timed secondary strike I had seen in 30 years, and that Diane Park would have called it a good shot, and that I was glad her board was still in the ship. The crescent flanking pair broke formation. After that it moved quickly, because things that have been going wrong for 8 minutes tend to move quickly once the direction becomes clear. I called no total engagement order. I did not need to. 14 Earth crews who had been running drills for this exact kind of fight since before most of them were assigned to the fleet did not need to be told what to do when the tactical map looked the way ours did at the 18-minute mark. They needed to not be stopped, and I made sure of that by staying off the fleet channel and letting them work. Voss tracked everything. She was very good at tracking. She called positions and readings in a voice that stayed level all the way through, and I noted it and made sure it went into her service record when we were back at station, because that kind of steady under that kind of pressure is not as common as people think it should be. At the 24th minute, the Crescent lead vessel took critical damage to its primary drive system and dropped its forward speed to near zero. The remaining 5 Crescent ships began pulling toward the transit corridor, which is not a retreat if you do not call it that in your own after-action report, but is a retreat in every other sense. I opened the open military frequency. Crescent compact vessels, I said. You are clear to withdraw. All Earth vessels hold fire. The lead vessel's broadcast came back after a pause. You could have destroyed us. Yes. Why didn't you? I thought about that for a moment, about what I wanted them to take with them when they left this system, not the memory of being destroyed, the memory of being let go, the memory of what it had cost them to get to this point. I'm sending you our damage report, I said. Study it on the way home. I closed the frequency. Marsh looked at me. Our damage report, he said carefully. Sir, our damage report is going to show them that 6 hits on the Dunkirk didn't crack her hull. Yes. And that the Bakersfield's primary array absorbed their opening salvo. Yes. And that we have a secondary weapons system they had no intelligence on at all. Yes. He thought about it. That's a threat. That's information, I said. A threat is when you have to say it out loud. The Crescent fleet entered transit and was gone. The system went quiet. Harvin IV sat in the middle of the tactical display, green-brown and cloud-wrapped, the same as it had been 47 minutes ago. The debris of the orbital defense platforms was still spreading in a slow arc over the northern hemisphere, a mess we would need to help clean up. Everything else on the planet was intact. At the 28th minute, a transmission came up from the surface. Vreth colonial frequency. Audio only, compression artifacts from the emergency broadcast equipment. A voice, speaking Vreth in the high register their children use, which the translator rendered with a kind of earnest flatness that did not capture what the voice sounded like at all. Are the ugly ships ours now? The translator had paused on ugly because it did not have a direct equivalent in standard Vreth-to-English rendering and had substituted the closest functional match. I thought about telling Voss to log the translation as approximate. Then I decided not to. I thought the translator had gotten it right. Marsh made a sound. I turned to look at him. He was smiling. Not a diplomatic smile, not a controlled expression. An actual, unplanned, real smile. The kind that arrives before you have time to decide whether it is appropriate. Ugly ships, he said. Something happened in my chest that I had not felt in a long time. Something that started from somewhere around the second rib and worked its way up before it found a way out. I laughed. Not a short, controlled sound. A real one. The kind you cannot plan. The kind that has been waiting somewhere in you for a while and finally finds the door open. Voss turned from her console and stared at me. Marsh stared. The 3 overnight crew members who had been on the bridge since 3:47 stared. They had the collective expression of people who had served under me long enough to know that this was not normal and were not entirely sure how to categorize it. I let it go, all of it. Then I wiped my eyes, which had done something embarrassing, and looked at the communications panel. "Voss," I said, "get me the Vreth colonial frequency." "Yes, sir, a moment, open." I thought for a second about what to say to a child on a planet that was, as of 31 minutes ago, still intact. "Yes," I said, "they're yours." I closed the channel. Marsh was still looking at me. "Sir." "Log it," I said, "and send a full operational report to the Conclave Security Channel. All 14 vessels accounted for, no crew lost, Harvan IV colonial population confirmed secure." I stood and stretched my back, which had been complaining since the 4th minute of contact and had not had the chance to make itself heard until now. "And send a request to the Vreth diplomatic suite. Ambassador Shev Sorrel." What should the request say? I thought about her eyes going deep blue in the secondary weapons subdeck, about the hand she had put on the wall of level 3 and then taken away without asking the question she was forming, about the 11 minutes she had spent on the Conclave emergency channel waiting for someone to move. "Tell her the ugly ships say hello," I said, "and that she should come aboard when we're back at station. I'll show her the rest." I walked to the viewport. Below, the Bakersfield's hull was visible in the starlight, dented in 3 places from the Crescent Compact's opening salvo. One panel on the port's secondary array was at a slightly different angle than before, which meant someone on the repair crew would have a job when we got home. The rest of her was intact. I put my hand on the cold glass and looked at the level 7 corridor in my memory, the blast door, the seam where the new metal met the old, the initials in the lower corner of the frame. I did not say the name out loud. I did not need to. "I thought you held." I took my hand off the glass and went back to work. Shev Sorrel had different eyes when I met her at the airlock. Not the pale gold of someone who was comfortable and measuring, not the green of careful calculation. They were a color I did not have a word for, something between the deep blue of the secondary weapons subdeck and the kind of translucent gray that their species has in formal mourning. Not grief, exactly. The color of someone who has been made to understand something they would have preferred not to understand. I recognized it. I had seen it in my own mirror, years ago, after a different system and a different engagement, and a different thing that should not have had to happen did anyway. She came aboard with one attaché this time, no recording equipment. I noted that. I did not say anything about it. We walked to the observation deck without speaking, which was not uncomfortable the way silence between strangers can be uncomfortable. It was the quiet of 2 people who were both thinking about the same thing and had not yet agreed on how to talk about it. The observation deck looked out over Vila Station's main docking column. The Bakersfield was back in her berth. The review corridor was cleared now, the Conclave fleet display 2 days behind us. Other ships moved in the distance. The Keth Cathedral vessels, the Sorin Needles. Everyone was still here. Everyone was still filing positions and formal responses and amended security protocols. None of them had moved. Shev Sorrel stood at the viewport for a long time before she said anything. "The Conclave Security Council has issued a formal condemnation of the Crescent Compact's action," she said. "I saw it. 11 delegations co-signed." "I saw that too." She was quiet. Outside, a Drivari transport moved through the docking approach, precise and unhurried. "The Keth ambassador told me this morning that Earth's response was admirable but premature," she said. "That the conclave process would have reached a resolution." "When?" Her voice stayed even. He did not specify. I looked at the docking column, at the Bakersfield sitting in her berth with the dented hull and the misaligned panel on the port secondary array, at the protrusions and the offset drives and the thick walls and all the rest of it. 40,000 people, I said, on the ground. Yes. The conclave process would have reached a resolution. She did not say anything to that. I turned away from the viewport and looked at her. Why did you come back aboard? She met my eyes. The gray-blue color of hers was steady. I wanted to ask you something I did not ask during the tour. The blast door. She paused, yes. I had expected this question eventually. I had thought about how much to say when it came. I had decided, somewhere between Harvin IV and the Vila docking approach, that she had earned the full answer. I told her about Tila Singh. Not everything. The minimum viable unit, the one sentence that carried everything without explaining everything, because some things are not helped by explanation and are only diminished by it. But enough. The breach, the venting section, the welding kit, the door. Chef Sorrel listened without moving. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, she was 23. Yes. And you put her initials on the door. She put them there herself, habit. I paused. No one painted over them. Another long quiet. She looked back out at the viewport, at the baker's field. I owe you an apology, she said. You don't. We laughed at the review, my delegation. It doesn't matter. She turned to look at me. It matters to me. I thought about that. About the pale gold color of her eyes when she first walked aboard and saw the ship as a catalog of flaws. About the green of careful measurement. About the deep blue in the subdeck when she understood what a secondary array meant for a civilization that built ships against the day they lost the first fight. I thought about a child's voice on a colonial frequency asking if the ugly ships were ours now. You know what you were looking at now, I said. That's enough. She shook her head slightly, not disagreeing, processing. When I walked through this ship, I thought you were over-engineering around fear, she said. Excessive redundancy because your people were too cautious. Too worried about scenarios that were unlikely. And now, she looked at the blast door corridor in the direction of her memory. Now I think you were not engineering around fear at all. She looked back at me. You were engineering around experience. I did not say anything. How many times, she said carefully, how many times did something have to go wrong before you built it the way you built it? I thought about 30 wars, about Tila Singh and Diane Park and the admiral who drew the spec for the bridge relocation by hand at a field hospital, about 47 people on the other side of a door that held, about the names that were on the walls and the panels and the sealed compartments all through the ship, not as plaques, not as memorial markings, just as the invisible record of every decision that had been made by someone who could not afford to make it wrong twice. Enough times, I said. She nodded. Once. The way people nod when they have understood something they were not ready for and have decided to carry it anyway. We stayed at the viewport a while longer. The station moved through its orbit. The Keth vessels were beautiful in the distance. The sarin needles caught the starlight. The Bakersfield sat in her berth with her dented hull and her misaligned panel and her second weapons system, and her two thick walls and her offset drives and her blast door on level 7, with the initials pressed into the corner of the frame. The conclave wants to hold a formal recognition ceremony, Chef Sorrel said, for Harvin IV. The Security Council has scheduled it for next week. I know. You'll be there. Yes. She looked at me, and the ships will go through the review corridor again. That's the protocol. She was quiet for a moment. They'll look at them differently this time. Yes, I said, they will. What I did not say was, it would not matter how they looked at them. It did not matter if they saw the redundancy now, if they studied the secondary arrays and the offset drives and the blast door and all the rest. It did not matter if they called it impressive instead of primitive, if they replaced their polite laughter with respectful assessment. Because they still did not know the part that was not visible. The part that was not in the hull thickness or the weapons configuration, or the engine layout. The part that was in the cruise. In the 26-year-old lieutenant who had asked, "Can we handle it?" and then sat down and worked the problem. In the ensign who had held her voice level for 31 minutes of combat. In the captain who had taken 6 hits and filed a maintenance checklist. In the commander who had made a shot that a dead colleague would have called good. In every person inside every ship who had been trained and retrained, and trained again on the assumption that the worst day was not a theoretical event, but a scheduled one. Who drilled on redundant systems not because someone told them to, but because they understood what the redundancy was for. Who knew the blast door on level 7 and the name pressed into its corner, and what that name meant about the world they operated in. You could study our ships for a year and catalog every protrusion and every secondary system and every thick wall. You would still not have the thing that made it work. "Admiral," HFY said. Her voice had something in it I had not heard from her before. Something that was not diplomatic or measured or professionally calibrated. Something genuine and a little unsure. "What should we have been doing while you were building all of this?" I thought about that for a long time. "The same thing," I said finally, "but you would have had to want it badly enough." She did not ask what I meant. I think she already knew. The recognition ceremony was held 6 days later in the main hall of Vila Station, and the Earth fleet went through the review corridor again, and 14 civilizations watched the Bakersfield and her 13 companion vessels move through the display column. No one laughed. The Keth ambassador studied the protrusions. I saw him leaning forward in the gallery, his aide pointing at the secondary array configuration, both of them talking in low tones. The Sauran representatives were doing the same. The Drevari, who had wanted a formal threat assessment before committing assets to Harvan IV, stood in an uncharacteristically still group and watched the Bakersfield pass with an attention that was very different from the attention of a week ago. HFY gave the formal address. She was correct and gracious and said the right things in the right order and gave the conclave stellar commendation to me on behalf of Harvan IV and the 40,000 colonists who were still there, because someone had moved in 11 minutes when 14 civilizations had talked. The commendation was beautiful, crystalline, mathematically perfect. I held it in both hands and looked at it and told her it was lovely. She smiled. It was not the diplomatic smile, it was something else. I gave the commendation to Marsh afterward. He looked at me like I had handed him a lit flare. "Put it in the forward corridor," I said. "Level 3, near where HFY put her hand on the wall." He did not ask why. He was learning. The reception afterward had the same soft light and the same interesting smells and the same circulating servers as the last one. The difference was that people approached the Earth delegation in the first minute, and the second. There was no 11-minute wait, no careful minimum distance, no polite calibration of how much interest to show. I stood in the middle of it and answered questions and shook hands in the various ways different species shake hands and said yes, and I understand and yes. And I watched Marsh move through the room doing the same, finding his footing, getting comfortable in the space that had not been available to us a week ago. He was good at it, better than I expected. He had the kind of face that people decided to trust without quite knowing why they had decided it, which is one of the most useful things a person in his position can have. At the far end of the room, a young Sauran officer approached him. She was asking about the secondary array configuration, which I could tell from the way Marsh shifted his weight. He always did that when a technical question engaged him properly. He pulled out his tablet, started explaining. "Good." I stepped away from the group around me and found a quiet corner near the viewport, the same one I had stood at during the first reception, and looked out at the docking column, at the Bakersfield in her berth. Repaired now, the dented hull panels replaced, the misaligned secondary array corrected. From the outside she looked the same as she always did, asymmetrical, brutalist, Too much of everything in the wrong places. An ensign appeared at my elbow. Not Voss, a different one, the kind of young that makes you feel the weight of every year you have lived. He was from the Arnhem and had clearly been sent over by someone to deliver something, because he had the over-formal posture of a person on an errand. Admiral Lennox, sir. He held out a small memory card. From Commander Hale on the Roanoke. She said you'd know what it is. I took it, I do. She said to tell you. He checked his mental notes with visible effort. She said Diane would have called it a good shot. I looked at the card. Then I looked out at the Baker's field. The ensign was watching me, waiting for a response he could carry back. Tell Commander Hale she's right, I said. Tell her I said exactly that. He nodded and went. I stood alone at the viewport for a while. The room behind me was full of 14 civilizations doing what they had not done a week ago, which was treating us like people who belonged in the conversation. The Keth who had called our response premature. The Drevari who had wanted threat assessments. The Saurin with their neat holding positions 3 systems out. None of that had changed. They were still who they were, still operating by their own logic, still building their beautiful ships and their elegant doctrines. That was fine. That was not my problem to solve. My problem was the one after this one, and the one after that. Marsh appeared beside me. He had extricated himself from the Saurin officer and brought 2 glasses of something that smelled better than the blue drink from the first reception. Eventful week, he said. Moderately. He handed me a glass. The Drevari ambassador wants a formal meeting. About fleet design philosophy. Set it up. The Keth have asked if Earth would be willing to share technical specifications on the secondary array configuration. Tell them we'll think about it. He nodded, made a note, stood there a moment longer looking out at the Baker's field. You know what I keep thinking about, he said. Tell me. The Crescent commander, what he said on the open frequency, what are these things? He looked at his glass. He wasn't asking about the ships, not really. No. He was asking about us. Yes. Marsh thought about that, and we never answered him. We did, I said. We sent him the damage report. He was quiet for a moment. Then, do you think he understood it? I thought about the Crescent lead vessel dropping its forward speed to near 0 at the 24th minute. About 6 ships pulling for the transit corridor, with a damage report from an Earth fleet that had fought them for 31 minutes and had no crew losses and was still, at the end of it, offering them the chance to leave. No, I said. He looked at me. Good, I said. I took a drink from the glass. It was better than the blue thing. Someone had done research. Outside, the Bakersfield sat in her berth with all her protrusions and her redundant everything, and her names pressed into corners, and her second answers and her third answers and the knowledge, built into every joint and seal and circuit, that the worst day was not a question of whether. Only when. And when it came, we would be ready for it, and for the one after it, and for the one after that, because we had been ready for it since before anyone in this room decided we were worth laughing at. I stood at the viewport and finished my drink and did not say any of that out loud. It was not the kind of thing you needed to say. It was the kind of thing you built.